The crowded halls of Jefferson High buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Students jostled for locker space, laughter echoed in pockets, and conversations overlapped in a cacophony of teenage life. Amid the crowd, Sophia Miller, a 16-year-old girl with round glasses and an awkward gait, walked as if she wanted to disappear. Her arms clutched her books tightly to her chest, a shield against the whispers that often followed her steps. Sophia was not the type to demand attention. She was soft-spoken, avoided confrontation, and preferred to sit unnoticed at the back of the classroom. Yet, her kindness shone like a beacon. Teachers adored her willingness to help, and classmates often turned to her for study notes or an encouraging word. She had a quiet reputation as the girl who always smiled, even when life didn't give her much reason to. But not everyone appreciated Sophia's unique charm. Marcos Hayes, the star quarterback of the school's football team, lived for attention. With his broad shoulders, cocky smirk, and a posse of admirers trailing behind him, Marcos had carved out a kingdom in Jefferson High. For someone like him, dominance was not just expected, it was essential. Yet, Sophia's ability to attract genuine goodwill without effort irked him deeply. To Marcos, it was unacceptable that someone who didn't fit the social mold could stand out, even for her kindness. It began subtly. Marcos and his friends made snide comments when Sophia passed, ensuring their voices were loud enough for her to hear. "Watch out, here comes the book avalanche," one would quip as Sophia clutched her textbooks. She ignored them, her face reddening but her eyes fixed forward. Marcos didn't stop there. He escalated to slipping cruel notes into her locker, spilling her water bottle accidentally, and ensuring she was the last one picked in gym class. Sophia endured it all with a quiet grace that only fueled Marcos's frustration. Her refusal to react made him feel invisible, and for someone like Marcos, that was intolerable. Then came the day of the school carnival, an event Sophia had been dreading. The large courtyard buzzed with activity, students laughing, booths set up with games, and teachers mingling amidst the crowd. Sophia had been helping her English teacher organize a book stall when Marcos spotted her. The plan formed quickly in his mind. He motioned to his friends and whispered instructions. A wicked grin spread across his face as they moved into position near the courtyard's fountain. Sophia, balancing a stack of books, didn't see it coming. Marcos walked up with exaggerated friendliness, draping an arm around her shoulder. "Sophia, we all know you're the smartest here," he said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "Why don't you show us how to multitask?" Before she could respond, he gave her a firm shove. Her books scattered across the ground as she stumbled backward, arms flailing, and fell into the cold water of the fountain. For a moment, there was silence. Then the laughter erupted. Dozens of students pointed their phones at her, recording every humiliating second. Sophia, soaked and shivering, scrambled out of the fountain, her cheeks burning. The videos were online before she even reached the locker room, the sound of laughter echoing in her ears. That night, Sophia locked herself in her room. She sat on her bed, replaying the incident in her mind. Her phone buzzed incessantly, messages from classmates offering pity or cruel jabs disguised as jokes. Tears streamed down her face as she turned the phone off and buried it under a pile of clothes. Her grandfather, Henry Miller, had seen enough. A retired boxer with a lean, wiry frame and a steady demeanor, Henry had always given Sophia space to handle her challenges. But the sight of her emerging from her room with swollen eyes and a broken spirit stirred something fierce in him. "Sophia," he called gently, standing in the hallway. She hesitated before stepping into the light, her face etched with vulnerability. "I think it's time I show you something." Confused but willing to trust him, Sophia followed Henry outside to the backyard. Behind the weathered shed stood a gym she had barely noticed before. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of leather and years of sweat. Dust clung to punching bags, a speed bag hung limply from its frame, and a rack of old boxing gloves sat untouched. "This was my sanctuary," Henry said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "And it could be yours too." He handed her a pair of gloves, their leather cracked but still sturdy. "I'm not saying you need to fight anyone, Sophia. But you need to fight for yourself." The words settled in her chest, a spark igniting in the darkness. Sophia slipped on the gloves, her hands feeling heavy and awkward. Henry led her to a punching bag and guided her through the basics: a proper stance, how to throw a jab, how to keep her guard up. Her first punches were weak, her movements clumsy, but Henry only nodded encouragingly. "Strength doesn't come overnight," he said, his hands steadying her trembling arms. "It comes from showing up, even when it's hard." Over the next few days, Sophia began to show up. She woke before sunrise, dragging herself to the backyard gym where Henry waited with his quiet patience. Each session was grueling. Sweat poured down her face, her muscles ached, and her knuckles grew red from the effort. But with every punch, a piece of her shattered confidence began to rebuild. Henry didn't just teach her how to box. He taught her how to think. "This isn't just about hitting a bag," he explained one morning. "It's about strategy, control, and discipline. The strongest fighters don't just use their fists, they use their minds." For Sophia, those lessons extended beyond the gym. At school, she started walking with her head slightly higher, her shoulders squared. The whispers still followed her, but she no longer let them define her. Marcos noticed the shift and watched her with growing irritation. The girl he thought he had broken was standing taller than ever. But Sophia's journey was far from over. While she had found a new sense of purpose, the world around her was slow to change. Marcos, determined to reassert his dominance, began plotting his next move. And though Sophia didn't know it yet, her strength would soon be tested in ways she could never have imagined. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden light over the quiet Denver neighborhood, when Sophia Miller stepped into her grandfather's backyard gym. Her muscles still ached from the previous day's session, and the thought of another grueling workout made her stomach churn. But as Henry Miller greeted her with his usual stoic nod, she tightened the laces of her gloves and resolved to push through. The gym was a relic of another time, filled with equipment that carried decades of wear and history. Faded posters of boxing legends adorned the walls, their determined gazes seeming to watch Sophia's every move. Dust motes swirled in the air as Henry turned on the lone overhead light, its dim glow giving the room an almost sacred ambience. "First rule of the ring," Henry began, tossing a towel over his shoulder, "it's not about strength, it's about control. If you lose your head, you've already lost the fight." He patted the heavy bag with a calloused hand. "Now show me what you've got." Sophia hesitated, her gloved fists hovering in front of her face. The memory of her classmates' laughter and the icy shock of the fountain water flashed through her mind. Gritting her teeth, she struck the bag with all her might. The sound of the punch echoed through the small gym, but Henry shook his head. "Too wild," he said, stepping behind her and adjusting her stance. "Keep your balance. Aim with purpose, not anger." Again. She exhaled sharply, focusing on the bag. Her next punch was more controlled, her body moving with intent rather than rage. Henry nodded in approval. "That's better. Remember, the fight isn't just here." He tapped her fists. "It's here." He pointed to her temple. The mornings turned into a routine. Sophia woke before dawn, her breath visible in the chilly air as she trudged to the backyard. Henry pushed her harder each day, demanding precision and discipline. Her punches grew sharper, her footwork more deliberate. But it wasn't just her physical strength that improved. Each session chipped away at the self-doubt that had taken root after years of ridicule. Between rounds, Henry shared stories of his time in the ring. "When I was your age, I thought winning was about knocking the other guy out," he said one morning, leaning against the ropes of an old boxing ring. "But I learned the hard way that the real fight is in your head. If you let fear take over, you've already lost." Sophia hung on his every word, absorbing not just the lessons in boxing but also the wisdom forged through a lifetime of struggle. Henry spoke of his time in Vietnam, where survival demanded mental toughness, and of his years as a professional boxer, where discipline was the difference between victory and defeat. "Life's like a ring," he told her one day, watching her practice jabs against the bag. "It'll knock you down over and over again. But every time you get back up, you prove you're stronger than whatever tried to take you out." The lessons extended beyond the gym. Sophia began to carry herself differently at school. Her head was held higher, her steps more purposeful. Though the whispers and stares persisted, she no longer felt the need to shrink under their weight. One afternoon, while walking through the school courtyard, she crossed paths with Marcos Hayes and his entourage. As usual, they were laughing and talking loudly, their presence commanding the attention of everyone nearby. Marcos caught sight of Sophia and smirked, stepping into her path. "Look who's found some confidence," he sneered, his voice loud enough to draw a few snickers from his friends. Sophia's heart pounded, but she didn't waver. She met his gaze with a calm, steady expression, her shoulders squared. "Excuse me," she said firmly, stepping around him without a glance back. The encounter left Marcos momentarily stunned. He turned to his friends with a forced laugh, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his tone. Sophia's silent defiance had thrown him off balance, and he didn't like it. Back at the gym, Sophia recounted the incident to Henry as she wrapped her hands in preparation for another session. "He didn't say much after that," she said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Henry nodded, his face impassive. "Good. But don't get complacent. People like him don't back down easily. They'll push harder when they feel their control slipping." The warning proved prophetic. Over the following weeks, Marcos's attempts to undermine Sophia grew bolder. He tried to trip her in the hallway, spread rumors about her to the other students, and even knocked her books out of her hands during lunch. But Sophia's response, or lack thereof, only frustrated him further. Each time, she picked herself up, her expression calm but unyielding. The training had given her more than physical strength. It had given her the ability to maintain control in the face of provocation. By the end of the summer, Sophia's transformation was undeniable. Her punches were sharp and powerful, her footwork light and precise. Henry often watched her with a quiet pride, though he never let it show too much. "You're ready," he said one morning after she landed a perfect combination on the bag. Sophia lowered her gloves, her chest rising and falling with exertion. "Ready for what?" Henry's gaze was steady. "For whatever life throws at you next." As the first day of the new school year loomed, Sophia braced herself for the challenges ahead. She knew Marcos wouldn't stop, and the social hierarchy of Jefferson High wouldn't change overnight. But she also knew she wasn't the same girl who had walked those halls months ago. Sophia's newfound strength wasn't just physical. It was the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who had faced herself and emerged stronger. What she didn't realize was that the greatest test of her resolve was just around the corner, a test that would force her to confront not just her fears but the very foundation of who she was. The first day of the new school year dawned crisp and clear, the late summer sun bathing Jefferson High in a golden glow. Sophia Miller stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting her plain but neatly pressed shirt. Her reflection looked back at her, a girl transformed. Her frame, once round and hunched, was now steadier, her shoulders squared. Her eyes held a quiet determination, a far cry from the timid girl who once avoided her own gaze. "Sophia, you've got this," she whispered to herself before grabbing her backpack and heading out the door. At Jefferson High, the familiar chaos reigned supreme. Students milled about the courtyard, catching up after the summer break. Sophia felt the weight of their glances as she walked across the grounds. Some looked surprised, others curious, and a few whispered among themselves. She knew what they saw, a version of her they couldn't reconcile with the girl they once knew. But she kept her head high, her stride purposeful. She wasn't looking for approval anymore. The new Sophia wasn't here to prove anything, she was here to stand her ground. Marcos Hayes leaned against a picnic table at the center of the courtyard, flanked by his usual entourage. His sharp eyes followed Sophia's every move, his smirk fading into a frown. Something about her was different, unsettlingly so. Gone was the girl who would shrink at his jabs or avert her gaze when he walked by. The shift in her demeanor made his stomach churn with unease. Determined to remind everyone of his dominance, Marcos pushed himself off the table and sauntered toward her, his posse trailing behind. The crowd around them seemed to part instinctively, creating an unspoken stage for the confrontation. "Well, well, look who decided to join the rest of us," Marcos said, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "Guess the fountain wasn't enough to keep you down, huh?" Sophia stopped, her eyes locking onto his. She said nothing, her silence cutting deeper than any retort. Her calm, unflinching stare unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "What?" "Nothing to say." Marcos pressed, stepping closer. He expected her to falter, to stumble over an apology or excuse. Instead, she calmly stepped around him and continued walking toward the main building. The crowd murmured, some exchanging surprised glances. For the first time, Marcos felt the cracks in his carefully constructed image. Inside the school, Sophia found herself walking past the very fountain where her humiliation had unfolded months ago. She paused, her reflection rippling in the water. It was a stark reminder of how far she'd come, and how much further she was willing to go to protect the strength she had earned. The school day passed without incident, but Marcos's simmering frustration only grew. By lunch, he was fuming, his bravado dented by Sophia's refusal to play her old role. His friends whispered encouragement, urging him to take control of the situation. "Man, you can't let her disrespect you like that," one of them said. "She's making you look weak," another added. Marcos scowled, the words stoking his anger. His pride demanded retribution, and an idea began to form. The lunchroom was packed as usual, the noise of clattering trays and overlapping conversations filling the air. Sophia sat alone at a table near the window, eating quietly. Her solitude wasn't born of loneliness, it was a choice. She had grown accustomed to her own company, finding strength in it. Marcos approached with calculated theatrics, holding a large soda cup in one hand. His grin was back, though it masked the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Hey, Sophia," he called, his voice cutting through the din. The room quieted, all eyes turning toward them. Sophia looked up, her expression unreadable. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said with a smirk, tilting the cup just enough for the soda to spill onto her lap. The crowd gasped, a few students snickering nervously. Sophia stood slowly, brushing the liquid off her jeans. Her eyes met Marcos's, and for a moment, the entire cafeteria seemed to hold its breath. "Clean it up," she said evenly, her voice calm but firm. Marcos blinked, taken aback. "What did you just say?" "I said, clean it up." Her tone didn't waver, her gaze steady. The room erupted into murmurs, students shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Marcos's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of doubt. His usual tricks weren't working, and the balance of power was slipping away. "You think you're tough now," he sneered, stepping closer. "Fine. Let's settle this like adults." The challenge hung in the air, electric with tension. Sophia didn't flinch. "Name the time and place," she replied. Marcos hesitated, his bravado suddenly feeling like a trap of his own making. But he couldn't back down now, not in front of everyone. "Tomorrow night," he said, his voice louder than necessary. "The old warehouse behind the school. Be there." Sophia nodded once, her calm demeanor unnerving him further. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the cafeteria, leaving Marcos to stew in his own bravado. The news spread like wildfire through the school. By the end of the day, everyone was talking about the upcoming showdown. Opinions were divided. Some thought Sophia was making a mistake, while others admired her courage. That evening, Sophia returned to her grandfather's gym, her resolve unshaken. Henry was waiting, his sharp eyes studying her carefully. "I heard," he said simply. Sophia nodded, unwrapping her gloves. "I had to do it. If I back down now, I'll never stop running." Henry sighed, stepping closer. "This isn't just about the fight, Sophia. It's about who you want to be when this is over. Remember, you're not fighting to humiliate anyone. You're fighting to prove something to yourself." "I know," she said, her voice steady. "That's why I'm ready." Henry studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Then let's make sure you are." They trained late into the night, Henry pushing her harder than ever. Every jab, every duck, every combination was sharper, faster, more precise. Sophia's body ached, her knuckles raw, but she didn't stop. The gym became a crucible, forging her into something stronger than she had ever imagined. As she left the gym that night, the moon casting a pale light over the quiet neighborhood, Sophia felt a strange sense of peace. The fight was inevitable, but for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. Tomorrow, the old Sophia would stay in the past. The girl who had been pushed, laughed at, and humiliated would step into that warehouse as someone new, someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for herself. And she wouldn't just fight for her dignity, she'd fight for the person she was becoming. The night of the fight arrived with an electric tension that seemed to hang over Jefferson High. Word of the showdown had spread far beyond the school's walls, drawing students from all corners of the community. By the time Sophia stepped out of her grandfather's car near the abandoned warehouse, a thrumming crowd had already gathered, their voices buzzing with anticipation. Henry Miller walked beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest, but her steps were firm, her breathing controlled. She was ready for this moment, not just because of the hours of training she had endured, but because she was no longer the person she had been months ago. The warehouse loomed ahead, its cracked windows and rusted beams casting eerie shadows under the dim streetlights. Inside, the air was thick with the acrid scent of dust and sweat. Students stood in tight clusters, their phones poised to record every second of the fight. The makeshift ring in the center, roped off with old cables and duct tape, was illuminated by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Marcos Hayes was already there, his confidence radiating as he performed exaggerated stretches and traded cocky grins with his friends. He wore a tank top that showed off his muscular frame, clearly intent on intimidating Sophia. But as she stepped into the ring, her calm demeanor wiped the smirk off his face. Sophia wore no theatrics, just plain workout clothes and her grandfather's old boxing gloves, their leather-worn but reliable. Her eyes locked onto Marcos's, unwavering, and for the first time, he felt a sliver of unease. The crowd quieted as Henry stepped into the ring with Sophia, adjusting her gloves one last time. His voice was low, but every word carried the weight of years of experience. "Remember, you're here for yourself, not for them. Keep your focus. Stay calm." Sophia nodded, exhaling slowly as Henry stepped out of the ring. Across from her, Marcos rolled his shoulders, his bravado returning as he looked out at the crowd. "You ready to embarrass yourself again?" he taunted, his voice loud and mocking. Sophia didn't respond. She raised her gloves, her stance steady. The silence was her answer. A self-appointed referee stepped between them, a senior who had apparently decided he'd mediate the fight. "All right," he announced. "Clean fight. First one to get knocked down 3 times loses. Let's go." The crowd erupted into cheers as the makeshift bell sounded, a broken school handbell clanging sharply. Marcos lunged first, throwing a wild right hook, clearly expecting Sophia to flinch. But she had spent months preparing for this. She sidestepped gracefully, her movement precise, and countered with a quick jab to his side. The impact was solid, forcing Marcos to stumble back slightly, his expression flickering with surprise. The crowd gasped, the energy in the room shifting as they realized this wouldn't be the one-sided beatdown they'd anticipated. Marcos's face twisted with anger. He charged again, his punches faster but no more controlled. Sophia ducked and weaved, her training evident in the way she moved with fluid confidence. Henry's voice echoed in her mind. Let them tire themselves out. You control the pace. Sophia waited for her moment, absorbing his aggression with her guard up, her feet light on the concrete floor. When Marcos overextended on a punch, she seized the opportunity. A sharp uppercut landed squarely on his jaw, and he staggered backward, nearly losing his footing. The first knockdown came soon after. A clean hook from Sophia's left hand caught Marcos off guard, sending him sprawling to the ground. The crowd roared, half in disbelief, half in exhilaration. Marcos got up quickly, his face flushed with humiliation and fury. He glared at Sophia, his jaw tightening. You're dead, he hissed, throwing his gloves back up. But Sophia was unshaken. She didn't taunt or gloat, she simply reset her stance, ready for his next move. The second round was messier. Marcos, desperate to regain control, fought with raw aggression, abandoning technique entirely. His punches were wild, his movements reckless. Sophia stayed composed, letting his frustration work against him. When she landed her second knockdown, a swift 1-2 combination that left Marcos kneeling on the ground, the crowd's energy shifted entirely. Students who had once cheered for Marcos began to murmur, their loyalty wavering as they witnessed his unraveling. Henry, watching from the sidelines, allowed himself a small smile. His granddaughter was holding her own, not just physically but mentally. Marcos's recovery was slower this time. He wiped blood from his split lip, his chest heaving as he glared at Sophia. The crowd's murmurs turned to cheers, this time for her. Fueled by anger and embarrassment, Marcos came at her one last time. His punches were faster now, desperation lending him a burst of strength. Sophia absorbed a few hits, the impact jarring but not enough to break her focus. Then came the moment she had been waiting for. As Marcos lunged with a telegraphed haymaker, Sophia ducked low, pivoting sharply. She delivered a devastating cross to his ribs, followed by an uppercut that sent him crashing to the floor. The third knockdown. The warehouse fell silent, the weight of the moment settling over the crowd. Marcos lay sprawled on the ground, groaning as he tried and failed to rise. Sophia stood above him, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. But she didn't celebrate. Instead, she stepped back, lowering her gloves. She extended a hand toward Marcos, her voice calm but firm. Get up. Marcos stared at her, his pride and pain warring on his face. After a long pause, he took her hand, allowing her to help him to his feet. This isn't about humiliating you, Sophia said, her voice carrying across the silent room. It's about respect, something we both deserve. The crowd erupted into applause, their phones capturing not just the fight but the moment of sportsmanship that followed. As Sophia stepped out of the ring, Henry was waiting for her, his face calm but his eyes shining with pride. You did good, kid, he said, patting her on the shoulder. Sophia glanced back at the ring, where Marcos stood alone, his head bowed. The fight was over, but the real victory wasn't hers alone. It was in the shift she had created, not just for herself but for everyone watching. She walked out of the warehouse, the cool night air hitting her face as she breathed deeply. For the first time, she felt free, unburdened by fear or doubt. This wasn't just a fight. It was the moment Sophia reclaimed her power. The air was heavy with silence as Sophia Miller left the warehouse that night, her gloves slung over her shoulder and her breath steady. Each step felt lighter, as though she had shed the weight of years of humiliation and doubt. Behind her, the crowd dispersed slowly, the murmurs of astonishment growing softer as students replayed the fight in their minds. Inside the warehouse, Marcos Hayes sat alone on the edge of the makeshift ring, his head hanging low and his knuckles bloodied. His friends had abandoned him as soon as the final knockdown occurred, their loyalty as fleeting as his dominance. For the first time in years, Marcos felt small, stripped of the bravado that had once defined him. The next morning at Jefferson High, the tension was palpable. By the time Sophia walked through the front doors, The hallways were abuzz with whispers. Groups of students turned their heads as she passed, their eyes filled with newfound respect and curiosity. The videos of the fight had gone viral among the student body, each replay cementing Sophia's transformation into an unexpected symbol of strength and dignity. Sophia, however, wasn't interested in the attention. She moved through the halls with the same quiet confidence she had carried into the warehouse. Her focus wasn't on the past night's victory, but on maintaining the inner strength she had fought so hard to build. She reached her locker and began unloading her books when she heard hesitant footsteps behind her. Turning, she found herself face to face with Marcos. He stood alone, his usual arrogance replaced by a tentative awkwardness. His lip was swollen, and a faint bruise marred his cheekbone, a reminder of the night before. "Sophia," he began, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." The hallway seemed to pause. Students nearby pretended not to listen, but their ears perked up at the rare sight of Marcos Hayes swallowing his pride. Sophia tilted her head, studying him. She could see the discomfort in his posture, the way he avoided meeting her eyes for more than a few seconds at a time. It was clear this wasn't easy for him. "You think an apology fixes everything?" she asked, her tone even but not unkind. "No," Marcos admitted, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I don't. I don't know why I did all that to you. I guess I was trying to feel better about myself, and it was wrong. I know it doesn't change what I did, but I'm sorry." For a moment, Sophia said nothing. The anger she might have felt months ago didn't surface. Instead, she saw a glimpse of something deeper in Marcos, a boy trying to reconcile the person he was with the person he wanted to be. "Apologies don't change the past," Sophia said, her voice steady. "But they can change what you do next." Marcos nodded slowly, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I'll try to do better," he said. "Good," Sophia replied simply, turning back to her locker. As he walked away, she noticed something in the corner of her eye, a few students whispering and exchanging glances. They weren't looking at her with pity anymore, nor with the ridicule she had grown used to. They were looking at her with admiration, a silent acknowledgement of her strength. In the days that followed, the dynamics at Jefferson High began to shift. Marcos, once the unchallenged king of the school's social hierarchy, withdrew from his usual antics. He started sitting alone at lunch, avoiding the spotlight he had once craved. His former friends drifted away, their loyalty dissolved the moment he showed vulnerability. At first, Sophia expected him to return to his old ways, but he didn't. Instead, she noticed small but significant changes. He began offering quiet apologies to those he had wronged, including the students he had bullied for years. While some brushed him off, others hesitated, sensing the sincerity in his attempts. Sophia, too, felt the changes ripple through her life. The gym she had once shared exclusively with her grandfather became a new kind of sanctuary. Henry suggested opening it to others who might benefit from the lessons she had learned. "What do you think about hosting a self-defense class?" he asked one evening as they packed up after a workout. Sophia hesitated, the idea foreign but intriguing. "You really think people would want me to teach them?" "Absolutely," Henry replied without missing a beat. "You've got more to share than you realize." By the end of the week, flyers for the class appeared around the school, taped to bulletin boards and tucked into lockers. To Sophia's surprise, a dozen students showed up for the first session, mostly girls, but a few boys as well. The gym, once silent except for the thud of gloves against bags, came alive with chatter and laughter. Sophia led the group through warm-ups and basic techniques, her grandfather watching proudly from the sidelines. "This isn't just about fighting," she told them, echoing Henry's words. "It's about knowing your strength and not letting anyone take that from you." The sessions quickly became a regular event, drawing more students each week. What started as a self-defense class grew into something larger, a community where students felt seen, supported, and empowered. One afternoon, as Sophia wrapped up a session, she noticed Marcos lingering near the doorway. He looked out of place, his hands shoved into his pockets and his shoulders hunched. "Hey," he said awkwardly, stepping into the gym. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think this was your kind of thing." "It probably isn't," Marcos admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I thought, maybe I could help out. Or learn something." The room fell quiet, the other students exchanging uncertain glances. Sophia studied him for a moment before nodding. "Grab some gloves," she said simply. Marcos hesitated, then did as she instructed. He joined the group, his movements stiff and uncertain. The students watched warily at first, but as the session progressed, the tension began to ease. By the end of the hour, Marcos was sweating and smiling, the weight of his past mistakes seeming a little lighter. By the end of the semester, Jefferson High felt like a different place. The atmosphere, once tainted by cliques and cruelty, was now marked by small acts of kindness and camaraderie. While the scars of the past hadn't vanished, they had begun to heal, replaced by a shared sense of growth. Sophia, for her part, continued to walk the halls with quiet confidence. She no longer needed to prove herself, not to Marcos, not to the school, and not to anyone else. She had found her strength, and it had become a part of her, unshakable and enduring. And as she glanced back at Marcos during one of their self-defense sessions, she saw something she never expected, a boy who, like her, was learning to fight for something better. As winter settled over Denver, the once familiar walls of Jefferson High felt transformed. The cold mornings didn't carry the usual tension of whispered ridicule or the oppressive hierarchy that had defined the school for so long. Instead, there was a quiet energy of camaraderie and mutual respect, a change that had begun on the night of the warehouse fight and continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. Sophia Miller walked through the halls with her usual calm, nodding at familiar faces and exchanging greetings with classmates who now saw her in a new light. Her confidence wasn't just in her stride, it radiated in the way she carried herself, a silent reminder of what she had endured and overcome. The self-defense sessions at her grandfather's gym had become a centerpiece of this transformation. What started as a handful of students had grown into a thriving group of over 30 attendees, filling the gym every week. With Henry's guidance and Sophia's leadership, the classes had evolved into a space where students could find strength, not just physical, but emotional. One Friday evening, as the group warmed up for another session, Henry watched from the corner with a satisfied smile. "You've turned this place into something special, Sophia," he said when she walked over to him. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, wiping sweat from her brow. Henry shook his head. "You're the one who stepped into that ring and fought back. All I did was give you a few tools. The rest, that was all you." Before Sophia could respond, the gym door creaked open and Marcos Hayes stepped in. The chatter among the students quieted as they turned to look at him. Marcos had been attending the sessions sporadically for the past month, but his arrival still carried a ripple of unease. "Hey," he said awkwardly, lifting a hand in greeting. Sophia nodded. "You're just in time. Grab some gloves." Marcos made his way to the equipment rack, and the warm-up resumed. Though he was still finding his footing in this new dynamic, Sophia noticed small changes in him. His movements were less aggressive, his interactions less performative. He wasn't there to dominate, he was there to learn. As the session wrapped up, Sophia gathered the group in a circle, her voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "I want to thank all of you for showing up every week," she said. "This isn't just about self-defense. It's about building confidence and knowing you have a place where you belong. We've created something here that's bigger than any of us, and I'm proud to be part of it." The students erupted into cheers and applause, their faces glowing with pride. As they began to disperse, chatting and laughing, Marcos lingered by the door, waiting until the others had left. "I wanted to say thanks," he said finally, stepping toward Sophia. "For what?" "For letting me be part of this," he replied, his voice quieter than usual. I know I don't deserve it after everything I did, but this place has helped me. You've helped me. Sophia studied him for a moment, her expression softening. People can change, Marcos. What matters is what you do with that change. Marcos nodded, his gaze steady. I'm trying. I hope you know that. I do, she said simply. The following week brought the annual Winter Assembly, an event Sophia had always dreaded in the past. It was a showcase of school achievements, where students were recognized for their contributions and accomplishments. But this year felt different. Sophia sat in the audience with her classmates, watching as the principal took the stage to deliver his speech. The auditorium was decorated with twinkling lights and festive garlands, a stark contrast to the anxiety that had once defined her school experiences. And now, the principal announced, his voice echoing through the room, we'd like to recognize a student who has made an extraordinary impact on our community. This person has shown resilience, courage, and leadership in ways that inspire us all. Please join me in congratulating Sophia Miller. The applause was deafening as Sophia froze in her seat, her heart pounding. She glanced at her grandfather, sitting a few rows behind her, his face glowing with pride. Slowly, she stood and made her way to the stage, the weight of the moment settling over her. The principal handed her a small plaque, but it wasn't the object that mattered, it was the acknowledgement, the validation of her journey. Sophia stepped up to the microphone, her hands trembling slightly. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she looked out at the sea of faces. I don't really know what to say, she began, her voice clear but soft. This year has been hard. There were moments when I didn't think I could get through it. But I learned something important. Strength doesn't mean not being afraid. It means not letting fear stop you. When I stepped into that ring, it wasn't just to fight Marcos. It was to fight for myself, to prove that I deserved respect, not because of how I looked or who I was, but because I was willing to stand up for what mattered. But this isn't just my story. It's about all of us. We all deserve to feel strong, to feel safe, to feel seen. And if we can create that for each other, then maybe we can change more than just a school. Maybe we can change the way we see the world, and ourselves. The audience erupted into applause, and as Sophia stepped down, she felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The weeks that followed saw the gym grow even more. Henry eventually suggested expanding, and with the help of a few parents and community members, they began raising funds to refurbish the space and add more equipment. Sophia also began thinking about her future. Inspired by her journey, she decided to pursue a career in physical education and counseling, hoping to continue empowering others to find their strength. As for Marcos, he continued to attend the sessions, gradually earning the trust of the group. While some students were slower to accept him, his consistent effort and willingness to acknowledge his mistakes eventually won them over. One evening, as Sophia packed up after a session, Marcos approached her with a rare smile. "You've really turned this place into something incredible," he said. "It's not just me," Sophia replied. "It's all of us." Marcos nodded, his smile growing. "Still, I wouldn't have gotten here without you. So, thanks." Sophia looked at him, seeing not the boy who had pushed her into the fountain, but someone trying to make amends, not just with her, but with himself. "You're welcome," she said, her voice steady. As the snow began to fall outside, covering Denver in a blanket of white, Sophia walked home with Henry, her breath fogging in the cold air. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. Her journey wasn't over, but she knew one thing for certain. She had fought for herself, and she had won. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more content like this, support the channel by subscribing, liking, and turning on notifications.